Here with me now is Chief Communications Officer at Jobs Creators Network, Elaine Parker. Also with us, global business consultant Hillary Fordwich. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Elaine, break it down for me, this jobs report, right? The White House wants to say it's the greatest thing ever, but clearly it is not good news for Americans.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Lydia. And it is true. If you start to dig down, you really have to discount that top line number from the establishment survey and look at the household survey, which doesn't duplicate people of two jobs, and it does take into account people who are self-employed, and that's important. And what that survey shows is that we did lose 408,000 jobs, but let me tell you what we gained. We gained 300,000 part-time jobs, and we know that more than 8 million people have are working in two jobs right now because they can't make ends meet. That's what the administration doesn't want to talk about, and that's really what the rest of us are living in the real economy.
You know, Hillary, the housing costs, you heard me, ranting about it. I'm experiencing it myself, the taxation. Talk to me and explain to people out there, how can it be that houses are worth more when we see interest rates are so high?
Well, I would just say one thing. Thank you for having me back again, Lydia. I would just say one thing. I hope every single American thinks about what Reagan asked, and I hope that Trump asks this. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? You just pointed to an example where you're certainly not. And the reason that the house prices, obviously the value has increased, is because there's so little inventory on the marketplace, because the majority of Americans that have 3% interest rates on their mortgages, like me and many, many millions of others, we're not going to sell. When you've got a 3% rate, you're not going to sell for 8%. And if I could now just address those numbers that you were just talking about, I agree with Elaine. Let's look at the household numbers. And you know who also agrees about that household survey? And this is very important. This is Anna Wong. She's the chief economist at Bloomberg. Remember, Bloomberg gave $150 million to Democrats in the last election cycle. Why is it so important what the Bloomberg chief economist is saying? Because if even she says the household numbers need to be believed, now you know they're totally out of whack.
Biden himself, he put out a statement on the May jobs report. Here's some of what he said. Quote, "The great American comeback continues, but we still have to make more progress. I will keep fighting to lower costs for families like the ones I grew up with in Scranton." Elaine, what do you think about that? I mean, the great American comeback when we are much worse off than we were under President Trump.
The administration, the president, is just disconnected from the reality that Americans are living in. The average family is paying $12,000 more a year just to maintain the status quo and their standard of living. And if we take the jobs numbers on the top line number, that 272,000, just at face value, let's give them that. Half of those jobs came in the form of government or quasi-government social sector jobs that don't generate any kind of GDP and economic growth. I mean, that's what the Biden administration has created with Bidenomics. And small businesses are suffering. Everyday ordinary Americans are suffering. The price of gas is up. Groceries are up. I mean, that is the reality. That's the real economy that Americans are living in. And that's why we see the kind of polls we do between President Trump and President Biden.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of people suffering, everyday Americans, Hillary, you probably heard it there in my monologue there, where I played a soundbite of a mother. Her daughter is bit by a rat. I mean, you hear these kind of stories of people, Americans, living in poor conditions, complaining about it. They're struggling. Yet Joe Biden continues to fund this illegal evasion, give billions and billions of our taxpayer dollars to people that broke the law. Like Margaret Thatcher said, socialism is great until you run out of other people's money. Are we going to eventually run out of money doing things like this?
Right. Yes, you're absolutely right. Thatcher did say that, and you're absolutely right about what Americans are going to feel, particularly when you say about, are we going to run out of money? You know where they have? Chicago. There's a very good example for you. Last Thanksgiving, okay, so in Chicago, they gave 6 months free housing to 8,000 illegals, free housing and free meals. And at Thanksgiving, the local poor community, they went to that center and they just asked for a Thanksgiving meal, and they were turned away. So thinking of that poor lady with her little 4-year-old daughter having her face bitten by rats. This is the poor community in Chicago. This is what they're seeing. And actually, one of the community leaders there, she was quoted on air as saying she's voted for the Democrats her entire life. She'll never vote for a Democrat ever again. I think the poor communities across America, you think you're feeling it with your house, Lydia. I think they're they're feeling it even more. They're seeing this and they're thinking, they're Americans, why are they being treated this way? And last but not least, with regard to all these numbers, remember, last year, 11 out of 12 months, the job figures were revised very quietly down the next month. I bet you there'll be a quiet revision soon of these May numbers downwards.
Ladies, great conversation here. Thank you so much for the insight. Thank you both.
Pleasure, Lydia.
Thank you.